dentist became suspicious when a father wouldn't leave the room during his daughter's checkup. When he created a distraction, the girl quickly showed him something terrifying. Dr. Marcus Reynolds stood at the window of his office, watching the October rain form rivulets down the glass. The weather matched his mood, contemplative and a bit melancholy. Fall in Oak Ridge, Connecticut had a way of turning even the most picturesque New England town into a canvas of muted colors and reflective surfaces. He traced a raindrop with his index finger, following its journey until it disappeared from view. "Dr. Reynolds?" Diane's voice pulled him from his thoughts. "Your 9 o'clock is here. New patient, Sophie Bennett, age 9. Marcus turned from the window, offering his assistant a warm smile. Diane had been with him since he'd opened the practice 8 years ago, and her gentle manner with their young patients was one of the many reasons he considered himself fortunate in his staff. "Thanks, Diane. Give me just a minute to review her file." As Diane left, Marcus settled behind his desk and opened the digital patient record on his tablet. Standard information: recently moved to Oak Ridge, no previous dental records transferred yet, insurance through the father's employer. Nothing remarkable, and yet Marcus always approached new patient meetings with particular attention. Children's comfort at the dentist often hinged on these first impressions. He straightened his blue and yellow patterned bow tie, a signature touch that his young patients found less intimidating than the traditional white coat, and headed toward the examination room, passing the large saltwater aquarium that served as both a centerpiece and calming distraction in the waiting area. The practice of Marcus Reynolds, DMD, pediatric dentistry was designed with children in mind. Walls adorned with underwater murals, comfortable seating sized for small bodies, and a treasure chest of small toys for post-appointment rewards. As he entered the waiting room, Marcus immediately noticed the girl sitting rigidly in the corner chair, her legs not quite reaching the floor. Sophie Bennett was small for 9, with light brown hair pulled back in a neat ponytail. She wore a purple sweater despite the warmth of the office, her hands folded in her lap, eyes downcast. Beside her sat a man Marcus presumed to be her father, tall, well-dressed in a gray suit that suggested a corporate profession, with a meticulously groomed appearance and an air of authority. "Sophie," Marcus approached with a gentle voice, crouching slightly to meet her eye level. "I'm Dr. Reynolds. It's nice to meet you." The girl's eyes flicked up briefly, hazel eyes that registered neither excitement nor fear, just a careful blankness, before returning to study her shoes. It was her father who stood immediately, extending his hand with a practiced smile that didn't quite reach his eyes. "Richard Bennett," he said, his grip firm to the point of discomfort. "Thank you for fitting us in. We've only been in Oak Ridge a month, and I wanted to make sure Sophie's dental care wasn't interrupted." "Of course," Marcus replied, disengaging from the handshake and turning his attention back to Sophie. "Would you like to come back and see where we work on teeth? I've got a chair that goes up and down like a rocket ship." No response from Sophie, not even a glance upward. Richard answered for her. "She's a bit shy with new people," he said, placing a hand on Sophie's shoulder. Marcus didn't miss the slight flinch before the girl stood obediently. "She also has some anxiety about dental visits, so I'll be coming back with her." It wasn't phrased as a question, and the statement triggered a subtle alarm in Marcus's mind. In his practice, he typically encouraged parents to remain in the waiting room after the initial meeting. Children often behaved differently without parents present, sometimes revealing more about their home life or anxieties when given a safe space away from parental oversight. More importantly, it allowed Marcus to establish trust directly with his young patients. "Why don't we start by showing both of you around, and then we can discuss the examination process?" Marcus suggested diplomatically, leading them through the door to the treatment areas. As they walked, Marcus noted how Sophie maintained a precise distance from her father, not close enough to suggest comfort, but not far enough to appear separate. Richard's hand remained on her upper back, guiding her movements in a way that seemed controlling rather than protective. These small details registered in Marcus's mind, filed away alongside other observations he'd made over 15 years of practice. In the examination room, Marcus's dental assistant Lisa was preparing the instruments, her friendly face breaking into a smile as they entered. Hi there. You must be Sophie, she said cheerfully. Do you like stickers? After we're done, you can pick any two you want from our collection. Sophie's expression flickered with momentary interest before settling back into careful neutrality. Again, Richard spoke for her. She's more of a reader than a sticker collector. Aren't you, Sophie? Sophie nodded almost imperceptibly, and Marcus exchanged a quick glance with Lisa. His staff were well-trained not just in dental procedures but in recognizing family dynamics that might signal concerns. Well, we have plenty of books too, Marcus said directly to Sophie. Now, would you like to sit in the special chair so we can take a look at your teeth? Sophie climbed into the chair without enthusiasm or resistance. As Lisa adjusted the position and placed a paper bib around the girl's neck, Marcus turned to Richard with his most professional demeanor. Mr. Bennett, we typically find that children respond better to examination when parents wait in our comfortable reception area. It helps us build a relationship of trust with our young patients and— That won't be necessary, Richard interrupted smoothly but firmly. As I mentioned, Sophie has dental anxiety. I'll stay with her. The response was polite on the surface, but the undertone left no room for discussion. Marcus made a mental note of the father's insistence. Not unheard of with parents of anxious children, but combined with Sophie's demeanor and the controlling hand on her shoulder, it raised his internal alert level. Of course, Marcus conceded, though he didn't miss the brief glance Sophie cast in his direction. A look he couldn't quite decipher but that hinted at something beyond simple dental fears. Why don't you have a seat over there where Sophie can still see you? As the examination began, Marcus maintained a gentle running commentary of each step, a practice he used with all his young patients. Now I'm going to count your teeth with this little mirror. It doesn't hurt at all. It's just like counting sheep, but much faster. Throughout the procedure, Sophie remained compliant but silent, opening her mouth on command and following directions with the mechanical precision of a child who knows the consequences of non-compliance. When Marcus asked her questions about school or her favorite subjects, her answers were minimal. Yes, no, I don't know. Always with a quick glance toward her father as if seeking approval for even these simple responses. Richard remained vigilant throughout, watching every movement Marcus made with an intensity that went beyond normal parental concern. When Marcus commented on a small cavity forming on one of Sophie's molars, Richard immediately asked detailed questions about treatment options, cost, and necessity, reasonable inquiries from a concerned parent, yet delivered with an undertone that felt almost accusatory. The moment of greatest concern came when Marcus was examining the lymph nodes along Sophie's neck, a standard part of his assessment. As he gently palpated the area, her collar shifted slightly, revealing what appeared to be the edge of a bruise extending below her collarbone. Sophie immediately adjusted her sweater, her eyes darting to her father, who had straightened in his chair. Sophie seems to have a bit of a bruise here, Marcus commented conversationally. Did you take a fall recently? Before Sophie could answer, Richard interjected. She's quite the climber. Always up in trees or on playground equipment. Took a tumble last weekend. Didn't you, Sophie? Sophie nodded, but Marcus noted how her hands gripped the armrests of the dental chair, knuckles whitening slightly. Kids will be kids, Marcus replied neutrally, though internally he was cataloging the location of the bruise, not typical for a playground fall, and the immediate parental intervention before Sophie could speak. The examination continued without further incident, but the undercurrent of tension remained. When Richard's phone rang, he checked the screen with a frown. I need to take this, he said, stepping toward the door. It's work. I'll be right outside. For the first time since they'd arrived, Sophie was separated from her father, if only by a doorway and a few feet. The change in her demeanor was subtle but unmistakable. Her shoulders lowered slightly, and she took a deeper breath than Marcus had observed previously. Sophie, Marcus said softly, using the brief window of privacy. How are you settling into Oak Ridge? Made any friends at your new school yet? She looked at him directly for the first time, her eyes revealing a wariness beyond her years. It's okay, she said, her voice barely above a whisper. I don't really talk to people much yet. That's understandable. Moving to a new place takes time to adjust, Marcus replied, maintaining the pretense of casual conversation while noting her slip from we to I. If you ever have questions about your teeth or if anything is bothering you, you can always tell me. Okay? Sophie's eyes darted to the doorway where Richard had disappeared, then back to Marcus. For a moment, it seemed she might say something more, but Richard's voice grew louder as he concluded his call, and the girl's expression immediately shuddered, returning to the careful blankness she'd maintained throughout the appointment. All done? Richard asked as he re-entered, his tone light but his eyes immediately assessing the situation. Just about, Marcus confirmed. Sophie has excellent oral hygiene, but there is that small cavity we'll need to take care of. And I'd recommend a fluoride treatment today, since your previous dental records haven't been transferred yet. The discussion of treatment plans and scheduling a follow-up appointment proceeded normally, but Marcus's mind was processing the various signals he'd observed. Sophie's withdrawn behavior, the careful way she monitored her father's reactions, the unexplained bruise, Richard's refusal to leave the room, and the subtle shift in Sophie's demeanor during his brief absence. We'll see you next Tuesday. Then, Marcus said as he walked them to the reception desk where Helen, his office manager, was preparing the insurance paperwork. Sophie, you get to choose something from the treasure chest before you go. The small display of colorful trinkets and toys usually elicited excitement from his young patients, but Sophie approached it with the same caution she'd shown throughout the visit. After a hesitant glance at her father, who nodded permission, she selected a small plastic dolphin figurine. The quickest, least disruptive choice. Do you like dolphins? Marcus asked. Sophie nodded slightly. They're smart, she said quietly. The first unprompted information she'd offered. They help each other when they're in trouble. Something about the way she said it, a significance beyond childish animal facts, made Marcus's professional concerns crystallize into a more specific worry. Before he could respond, Richard placed his hand on Sophie's shoulder again, steering her toward the door. Thank you, Dr. Reynolds. We'll see you next week. As they left, Marcus watched through the office window as they crossed the parking lot in the rain. Richard held an umbrella, but his protective gesture seemed performative rather than genuine, his grip on Sophie's arm visible even from a distance. The girl didn't skip or display any of the relief most children showed upon leaving the dentist's office. She just walked in step with her father, a small figure being guided toward a black sedan. That one bothers me, Helen said, coming to stand beside Marcus at the window. At 62, Helen had worked in healthcare long enough to develop the same instincts that were currently raising red flags in Marcus's mind. Me too, he admitted. Did you notice how she never spoke unless directly addressed? And even then, her father usually answered for her? Helen nodded. And the way she checked his reaction before doing or saying anything. I've seen that before. Her tone conveyed the shared understanding between them. Both had encountered families where such dynamics indicated deeper problems. Let's document everything from today's visit in detail, Marcus said. And let's make sure Lisa is available for Tuesday's appointment. I want an extra set of eyes. That evening, after his last patient had left, Marcus remained in his office, entering detailed notes about Sophie Bennett's visit. Standard procedure required documentation of potential signs of abuse or neglect, though he was careful to record only objective observations without jumping to conclusions. Still, the cumulative effect of those observations left him unsettled. On an impulse, he performed a quick internet search for Richard Bennett in Oak Ridge. For someone who had mentioned being a business consultant with an international firm, as he'd explained during casual conversation while scheduling the follow-up, Richard had surprisingly little online presence. No LinkedIn profile, no company website listing him among their staff, no social media footprint that Marcus could find. A few Richard Bennetts appeared in his search results, but none matched the man he'd met today. The absence of information was itself informative. In today's connected world, a complete lack of digital presence was unusual, particularly for a professional in a consulting role. Marcus leaned back in his chair, troubled by the mounting inconsistencies. A memory surfaced, himself at 10 years old, sitting in a doctor's office while his father charmed the physician with stories and explanations for the bruises and fracture being examined. Clumsy kid, his father had said with a laugh. always roughhousing with his friends. The doctor had accepted the explanation, and Marcus had learned an important lesson about how easily adults could be misdirected by a confident storyteller. Marcus closed his laptop with a sigh. Perhaps he was overreacting, projecting his own past onto an innocuous situation. Richard Bennett might simply be an overprotective father with poor social skills and privacy concerns that kept him off social media. Sophie might indeed have anxiety about dental visits and a perfectly normal home life. But as he gathered his things to leave, the image of Sophie's careful blankness stayed with him, along with her quiet words about dolphins helping each other when in trouble. In his 15 years of practice, Marcus had learned to trust his instincts about his young patients and the adults in their lives. Those instincts were now telling him that Sophie Bennett needed help, and that Tuesday's appointment might be his only chance to discover why. The rain had stopped by the time Marcus left the office, but the evening air retained the damp chill of mid-autumn. As he drove home through the tree-lined streets of Oak Ridge, past well-maintained colonial houses with warm lights glowing from within, he couldn't help but wonder what might be happening behind the closed doors of the Bennett home. Somewhere in this picturesque town where people largely kept to themselves and newcomers could easily maintain their privacy. "Be safe, Sophie," he murmured to himself as he turned onto his own street, hoping that his concerns would prove unfounded but knowing, with the weight of personal experience, that appearances could hide terrible realities, and that sometimes, the people who needed help the most were the least able to ask for it. The week between appointments crawled by for Marcus. He found himself thinking about Sophie Bennett in quiet moments, while brushing his teeth, during his morning jog through Oak Ridge's mist-covered streets, or late at night when sleep eluded him. Twice, he revisited his notes from her initial visit, reviewing the documented observations with a critical eye, questioning whether he might be overreacting. But each time he returned to the same conclusion. Something wasn't right in that family. Tuesday morning arrived with unseasonable warmth, the October sun burning off the early fog to reveal a brilliant blue sky. Marcus arrived at the office early, reviewing Sophie's treatment plan and checking that everything was prepared for her filling. He'd arranged the schedule carefully, ensuring Lisa would be his assistant for the procedure and that Helen would be at the front desk, both women sharp-eyed and intuitive when it came to concerning family dynamics. "You're expecting trouble with the Bennett appointment?" Lisa asked as she prepared the instruments, noting Marcus's unusual attention to detail for what was a routine procedure. "Not trouble," Marcus replied, choosing his words carefully. "Just awareness. There were some concerns from last week. If you notice anything unusual during the appointment, make a note of it." Lisa nodded, understanding the subtext. In 15 years of practice, they'd encountered situations requiring intervention before. A child with repeated suspicious injuries, a teenager whose extreme dental neglect signaled broader problems at home. The staff had protocols for such circumstances, established by Marcus based on both professional standards and personal conviction. The morning proceeded with a steady flow of patients, routine cleanings, an emergency visit for a 7-year-old with a tooth knocked loose during soccer practice, a consultation with anxious parents of a toddler who'd fallen and damaged his front teeth. Marcus maintained his friendly, reassuring demeanor throughout, but part of his mind remained fixed on the upcoming appointment with Sophie. At 11:45, 15 minutes before Sophie's scheduled arrival, Marcus stepped into his office to center himself. He opened the bottom drawer of his desk and removed a framed photograph. Himself at 12, standing beside his mother on a beach, both squinting into the sun. It had been taken during the brief period after they'd finally escaped his father, before cancer had taken his mother just 2 years later. The freedom and fear of that time had shaped his understanding of what children in difficult situations experienced. He was returning the photo to the drawer when Helen buzzed his office intercom. "The Bennetts are here," she said. "Early." Marcus took a deep breath, straightened his bow tie. Today's pattern featured tiny tooth fairies, a hit with his younger patients, and headed to the waiting room. Sophie sat in the same chair as before, but today there was a noticeable difference in her appearance. Dark circles shadowed her eyes, suggesting poor sleep, and despite the warm weather, she wore a long-sleeved navy blue shirt. Her hair, still in the same neat ponytail, seemed duller somehow. She looked up briefly when Marcus entered, and he caught a flicker of something in her eyes. Not hope, exactly, but perhaps recognition of a potential ally. Richard Bennett stood as Marcus approached, his handshake as firmly controlling as the previous week. Today he wore business casual attire, pressed khakis and a light blue button-down shirt, but maintained the same air of authority. "Dr. Reynolds," he greeted with a practiced smile. "I hope we're not too early. I had a meeting canceled." "Not at all," Marcus responded warmly. "We're ready for Sophie. How has she been doing since the last visit?" "Fine, fine," Richard answered dismissively. "No complaints about the tooth. She's a trooper, aren't you, Sophie?" Sophie nodded on cue, her gaze fixed on the tropical fish swimming in the waiting room aquarium. "Are you ready for your filling today, Sophie?" Marcus asked, directing the question to her specifically. "I promise it won't hurt. We'll make your tooth all nice and comfortable again." For a moment, Sophie's eyes met his, and Marcus saw a depth of weariness no 9-year-old should possess. "Yes," she answered softly. "Excellent," Marcus said, gesturing toward the treatment area. "Let's get started then." As they walked toward the examination room, Marcus noticed that Sophie maintained an even more careful distance from her father today, and the slight wince when she sat in the dental chair suggested discomfort beyond dental anxiety. "Mr. Bennett," Marcus began as Lisa entered with the prepared tray of instruments. "For more complex procedures like a filling, we find children actually do better without parents in the room. It allows them to focus on our instructions without worrying about how mom or dad might react to their nervousness." Richard's jaw tightened almost imperceptibly. "As I mentioned last week, Sophie has anxiety issues. I think it's best if I stay." Marcus had anticipated this response and was prepared with a strategy. "I understand completely," he said congenially. "However, there's actually an insurance matter Helen needs your input on at the front desk. Something about coverage for the composite filling material. It would only take a few minutes while we get Sophie set up. Lisa and I will take excellent care of her." Richard hesitated, clearly reluctant to leave but equally unwilling to appear unreasonable about an insurance matter. "I suppose that would be fine," he conceded after a moment. "Sophie, I'll be right back. You be good for Dr. Reynolds." The last sentence carried a weight beyond its simple wording, a command rather than reassurance. Sophie nodded obediently, her hands clasped tightly in her lap. "Lisa, would you mind showing Mr. Bennett to the front desk?" Marcus asked. "Helen has the paperwork ready." As Lisa led Richard away, Marcus busied himself reviewing Sophie's chart, giving her a moment to adjust to her father's absence. He purposely kept his movements calm and predictable, sensing her heightened vigilance. "Sophie," he said gently once he was certain Richard was out of earshot. "Before we start, I want you to know that this is a safe place. If there's anything bothering you, anything at all, you can tell me." The change in Sophie's demeanor was immediate and dramatic. Her eyes darted to the doorway, then back to Marcus, a desperate calculation visible on her face. Without a word, she quickly reached down and pulled something from her sock, a small, crumpled piece of paper. She thrust it toward Marcus with trembling hands, her eyes wide with fear and urgency. Marcus took the paper, unfolding it carefully. Written in a child's uneven handwriting were the words, "Please help me. He's not my dad. My real dad lives in Boston, David Miller, 23 Maple Street. Richard is my stepdad. He hurts me and Mom. He won't let us call anyone or leave the house alone. He says he'll kill us if we tell. Mom tried to call Grandma and he put her in the hospital. Please help." The stark plea struck Marcus like a physical blow. He looked up at Sophie, whose eyes were now brimming with tears she seemed determined not to shed. "Sophie," he whispered, struggling to maintain professional composure while his mind raced through the implications. "Thank you for trusting me with this. I'm going to help you, I promise." Footsteps in the hallway signaled Richard's return. With lightning quickness, Marcus folded the note and slipped it into his pocket, giving Sophie what he hoped was a reassuring nod just as Richard appeared in the doorway. "Everything sorted out?" Marcus asked pleasantly, his heart pounding as he turned to the instrument tray. Yes, just a coding issue, Richard replied, his eyes scanning the room as if checking for changes during his absence. All set here. Just about to get started, Marcus said. Sophie, I'm going to put this little napkin on your chest to keep water from getting on your shirt. Okay? As Marcus draped the paper bib, he noticed Sophie's hands still trembling in her lap. Richard took his seat in the corner chair, his attention fixed on their every movement. Lisa, Marcus said as his assistant returned, would you mind getting the special topical gel from the supply room? I think Sophie would be more comfortable with the cherry-flavored one. Lisa, a veteran of 15 years in the practice, recognized the coded request immediately. The special topical gel was their established signal for a concerning situation requiring discreet action. Of course, Dr. Reynolds, she replied, her expression neutral despite the alarm she must have felt. I'll be right back. Marcus turned to his young patient, forcing himself to proceed normally while his mind processed the shocking information and formulated a plan. Sophie, I'm going to explain everything before I do it, so there are no surprises, he said, deliberately using his calmest voice. First, we'll put some numbing gel on your gums, then a tiny injection that you'll barely feel. Once your tooth is nice and numb, we'll remove the decay and put in a strong filling. Sound okay? Sophie nodded, her eyes communicating so much more than simple agreement. They held desperate hope that he had understood her message, that he would somehow know what to do. Mr. Bennett, Marcus continued, does Sophie have any allergies to medications that you're aware of? As Richard launched into an unnecessary detailed account of Sophie's medical history, information already in her chart, Marcus used the distraction to discreetly remove his phone from his pocket. Keeping it partially concealed by the instrument tray, he quickly photographed Sophie's note before returning the phone to his pocket. Lisa returned, giving Marcus a subtle nod to indicate she'd alerted Helen at the front desk. Their office protocol for potential abuse situations was being activated. Helen would contact the authorities using their established non-emergency line, reporting concerns about a patient without raising immediate alarms. Let's get started then, Marcus said, applying the topical anesthetic to Sophie's gum. This will feel a little cold and tingly, Sophie. What followed was perhaps the most challenging procedure of Marcus's career, not because of technical difficulty, but because of the extraordinary effort required to maintain a facade of routine dental work while his mind raced with the implications of Sophie's note and the urgent need to keep her safe. As he worked, Marcus created a steady stream of natural-sounding conversation, asking Richard questions about their move to Oak Ridge, his work, and their adjustment to the community, gathering information while appearing merely friendly and professional. It must be challenging, relocating for work, Marcus commented as he prepared the local anesthetic. Sophie, little pinch here. Had you been in your previous location long? About 3 years, Richard answered smoothly. I go where the consulting work takes me. It's been an adjustment, but Sophie and her mother understand the demands of my career. And what firm did you say you consult with? Marcus asked, the needle hovering near Sophie's gum. A flicker of annoyance crossed Richard's face at the continued questioning. Axiom Strategic Partners, he replied after a barely perceptible pause. We specialize in corporate restructuring. Marcus nodded as if this were merely casual interest, making a mental note of the company name, another detail that could be verified or disproven. He proceeded with the injection, noting how Sophie barely reacted to the needle, a child well-practiced in hiding pain. This will take a few minutes to fully numb the area, Marcus explained, setting the syringe aside. Sophie, can you tell me if you feel any tingling in your lip? Sophie nodded, speaking for only the second time since her arrival. It feels funny, she said quietly. That's good, Marcus assured her. That means it's working. While waiting for the anesthetic to take effect, Marcus continued his careful questioning, learning that Sophie's mother, Ellen, wasn't working at the moment, that they lived in the Cedar Ridge subdivision on the north side of town, and that Sophie was being homeschooled temporarily until they settled in. All details that explained their isolation and Richard's ability to control their movements. As Marcus began the actual drilling procedure, he deliberately extended the process, taking more time than strictly necessary to remove the small area of decay. He needed to buy time for Helen's discreet call to the authorities to result in action. "Mr. Bennett," Lisa interjected smoothly during a pause in the drilling, "would you mind if I asked you about Sophie's dental history? Our records from her previous dentist haven't arrived yet, and it would help us establish a baseline for her care." As Richard engaged with Lisa, Marcus used the opportunity to make prolonged eye contact with Sophie, giving her a subtle nod that he hoped conveyed his understanding and commitment. The girl's eyes, wide with a mixture of fear and desperate hope, briefly closed in what seemed like profound relief. The drilling complete, Marcus began preparing the composite filling material, deliberately mixing it with meticulous care, extending each step of the procedure. Through the treatment room window, he could see Helen at the reception desk, speaking on the phone while maintaining a casual demeanor, a positive sign that their emergency protocol was in progress. "So, Sophie," Marcus said conversationally, "what subjects are you studying in your homeschooling?" Before Sophie could answer, Richard cut in. "The usual curriculum: math, science, reading. Sophie's always been an advanced student. We find the traditional school environment doesn't challenge her enough." "I can understand that," Marcus replied, placing the composite material in Sophie's tooth with deliberate precision. "Though I imagine she misses the social aspects. Friends, activities, that sort of thing." Richard's eyes narrowed slightly. "We provide plenty of enrichment," he said, his tone cooling. "Sophie's needs are well met." The growing tension was palpable, and Marcus sensed Richard's increasing suspicion at the extended procedure and persistent questioning. He needed to shift tactics. "Well, we're almost finished here," Marcus said, adjusting the curing light. "Sophie, this bright blue light will harden the filling material. It doesn't hurt, but it is very bright, so I'll give you these cool sunglasses to wear." As he handed Sophie the protective eyewear, Marcus deliberately fumbled, dropping the glasses. When he bent to retrieve them, he whispered rapidly, almost imperceptibly, "Help is coming. Stay calm." Rising again, he placed the glasses on Sophie's face with steady hands that belied his racing heart. "Perfect fit," he said cheerfully. "Now, look away from the light, please." As the composite cured under the blue light, Marcus observed Richard checking his watch with increasing frequency. The extended appointment was clearly testing his patience, and Marcus could sense the man's growing unease. "Just about done," Marcus assured them both as he removed the curing light. "Now I need to check the bite to make sure the filling isn't too high. Sophie, can you close your teeth together and tell me if anything feels unusual?" Sophie complied, then shook her head. "It feels okay," she murmured. "Excellent," Marcus said, removing his gloves. "I think we're all set then." "You did wonderfully, Sophie. Very brave." "Are we finished?" Richard asked, standing abruptly. "We have other appointments this afternoon." "Almost," Marcus replied. "I just need to go over some post-treatment care instructions, and then you'll be all set." He turned to Lisa. "Would you mind getting Sophie's home care package ready while I speak with Mr. Bennett?" Lisa nodded, understanding the request to stall further. "Of course. Sophie, would you like to help me pick out your new toothbrush color?" Before Richard could object, Marcus interjected, "It will just take a minute, and then we'll need to schedule a follow-up appointment in about 6 months for a regular checkup." Richard's jaw tightened, but he nodded curtly. "Fine, but please be quick. Sophie, go with the nice lady." As Lisa led Sophie toward the supply area, Marcus engaged Richard in a detailed explanation of caring for the new filling, watching through the glass partition as Lisa showed Sophie various toothbrushes while keeping her in sight of the treatment room but giving her a moment of supervised distance from her stepfather. "Mr. Bennett," Marcus said, wrapping up his instructions, "I noticed during the examination that Sophie has some signs of grinding her teeth at night, possibly stress-related. Has she experienced any significant changes or challenges recently that might be causing anxiety?" Richard's expression hardened. "No, nothing unusual," he replied, his tone clipped. "Sophie is a perfectly happy, well-adjusted child. If she's grinding her teeth, it's probably just a phase." "Of course," Marcus agreed pleasantly. "Still, if you notice any changes in her sleep patterns or behavior, please let us know." These things can sometimes indicate underlying issues that are easier to address early on. Richard's eyes narrowed, a flash of something dangerous crossing his features before he schooled his expression back to polite indifference. "I'll keep that in mind," he said, glancing toward where Sophie stood with Lisa. "Now, if we're finished, we really do need to get going." "Certainly," Marcus replied, leading him toward the reception area where Helen waited behind the desk. "We just need to schedule that follow-up appointment, and then you're all set." In the reception area, Marcus noted with both relief and apprehension that two uniformed police officers had entered the waiting room, a female officer with short blonde hair and a taller male officer with a serious expression. They were speaking quietly with a woman Marcus recognized as a county social worker who occasionally consulted with the practice on difficult cases. Richard froze momentarily at the sight of the officers, his hand instinctively reaching for Sophie, who had emerged from the supply area with Lisa. "What's going on?" he demanded, his voice low but intense. "Standard procedure," Marcus replied calmly. "Officer Jenkins and Officer Ramirez check in on local businesses regularly, community policing initiative. Oak Ridge is very safety conscious." The explanation seemed to partially mollify Richard, though his posture remained tense as he approached the reception desk. "We need to schedule Sophie's next appointment and be on our way," he told Helen briskly. "Of course, Mr. Bennett," Helen replied, her fingers hovering over the keyboard. "Let me check the doctor's availability 6 months out." As Helen deliberately prolonged the scheduling process, the female officer, Jenkins, approached with a professional smile. "Good afternoon," she greeted. "Lovely day, isn't it?" "Yes, it is," Marcus responded warmly. "Officers, this is Mr. Bennett and his daughter Sophie, new to Oak Ridge. Mr. Bennett, Officers Jenkins and Ramirez from the Oak Ridge PD." "Pleased to meet you," Richard replied with a stiffness that betrayed his discomfort. "Sophie, come here please." Sophie moved to her stepfather's side with visible reluctance, her eyes darting between the officers and Marcus, uncertainty and fear evident in her expression. "How are you today, Sophie?" Officer Jenkins asked kindly, crouching slightly to the girl's eye level. "Did you just have a dental appointment? Was everyone nice to you?" Before Sophie could answer, Richard placed his hand firmly on her shoulder. "Yes, everyone was very professional. Now, if you'll excuse us, we have another appointment to get to." "Actually, Mr. Bennett," Officer Ramirez interjected, his tone remaining casual but his stance shifting subtly to position himself between Richard and the exit. "We were hoping to have a quick word with you and Sophie. Standard community outreach. We're visiting local businesses and talking with folks about safety awareness in the neighborhood." Richard's fingers tightened visibly on Sophie's shoulder. "I appreciate the initiative, officer, but as I mentioned, we're running late for another appointment." "It will only take a moment," Officer Jenkins assured him, her friendly demeanor masking what Marcus recognized as professional assessment. "We're also conducting wellness checks as part of a county-wide program for new residents. Perhaps Sophie could show me where the restroom is while you chat with Officer Ramirez? Give us a chance for some girl talk." The request, phrased as casual but clearly a strategic separation attempt, caused an immediate change in Richard's demeanor. His face hardened, the pleasant facade dropping away entirely. "That won't be necessary," he said flatly. "Sophie stays with me. Now, if you'll excuse us." He turned toward the door, pulling Sophie with him, but Officer Ramirez casually shifted his position again, effectively blocking their path without being overtly confrontational. "Sir," Ramirez said, his tone firmer now, "it's standard procedure to speak with family members separately during welfare checks. I'm sure you understand the importance of ensuring everyone in our community is safe and well cared for." Richard's expression darkened further, a muscle working in his jaw as he assessed the situation. His gaze swept the room, taking in the officers, the social worker who had moved closer, and Marcus standing nearby, no longer making any pretense of casual conversation. "This is ridiculous," Richard snapped, his calm demeanor evaporating. "I don't know what you think is happening here, but my family's private business is not subject to your standard procedures. Sophie, we're leaving." As he moved to push past Officer Ramirez, Marcus stepped forward, making a split-second decision. He reached into his pocket and withdrew Sophie's note, holding it out to Officer Jenkins. "Officers, I believe this constitutes evidence of a credible threat," he said steadily. "Sophie gave this to me during her appointment today. I've also photographed it and sent it to my secure email." Richard's face contorted with rage as his gaze locked on the crumpled paper in Marcus's hand. "You had no right," he hissed, his voice dropping to a dangerous whisper. "No right to interfere in my family." "Mr. Bennett," Officer Ramirez said firmly, "I'm going to need you to step over here with me while we sort this out." What happened next occurred with shocking speed. Richard's composure shattered completely as he lunged forward, shoving Marcus with unexpected force. Marcus stumbled backward, crashing into the reception desk as Richard grabbed Sophie's arm and yanked her toward the door. "Daddy!" Sophie cried out, not to Richard, but a desperate plea to the universe, to her real father who wasn't present. Officer Ramirez moved to intercept, but Richard was already dragging Sophie toward the exit. In the chaos, Marcus regained his balance and rushed forward, driven by instinct and 15-year-old memories of his own helplessness. "Let her go!" he shouted, reaching for Sophie's other arm. Richard whirled, his face transformed by fury, and drove his fist into Marcus's jaw with stunning force. Pain exploded through Marcus's head as he staggered but maintained his grip on Sophie's arm, determined not to let this man take her. "Get away from my daughter!" Richard shouted, his voice unrecognizable from the controlled, charming man who had first entered the practice a week earlier. Officer Jenkins had drawn her weapon, her voice cutting through the chaos. "Sir, release the child and put your hands up now." For a terrible moment, Richard's grip on Sophie tightened further, the girl caught between him and Marcus in a tug-of-war that made her cry out in pain. Then Officer Ramirez tackled Richard from behind, breaking his hold on Sophie as they crashed to the floor in a violent struggle. Marcus pulled Sophie away from the melee, shielding her with his body as the officers subdued Richard, forcing his arms behind his back and applying handcuffs while he continued to shout threats and obscenities. "It's okay," Marcus murmured to Sophie, who was trembling violently against him, her small body racked with silent sobs. "You're safe now. You're safe." The social worker, Ms. Patel, approached slowly, her experienced gaze assessing Sophie with professional concern. "Sophie," she said gently, "my name is Mira. I'm here to help you. Would you like to sit down somewhere quiet where we can talk?" Sophie looked up at Marcus, her tear-streaked face seeking reassurance. He nodded encouragingly despite the throbbing pain in his jaw. "Ms. Patel is one of the good guys," he assured her. "She helps kids who are in tough situations." As Ms. Patel led Sophie to a private consultation room, the officers finished securing Richard, who had stopped struggling but continued to glare at Marcus with undisguised hatred. "You have no idea what you've done," he spat as Officer Ramirez lifted him to his feet. "No idea who you're dealing with." "Richard Garrett," Officer Jenkins said, reading from Sophie's note, "you're under arrest for child endangerment, assault, and battery. You have the right to remain silent." As the Miranda warning continued, Marcus stared in confusion. "Garrett? Not Bennett." Officer Ramirez nodded grimly. "We'll need to verify, but based on this note and the child's statement, this man appears to be Richard Garrett. There's been a missing persons report for an Ellen Miller and her daughter Sophie from Boston for nearly 3 months. David Miller has been searching for his daughter since his ex-wife and her new husband disappeared after a custody exchange. The implications washed over Marcus in a wave of cold realization. This wasn't simply a case of abuse. It was kidnapping, a complete upheaval of a child's life and identity. "The mother?" Marcus asked urgently. "Ellen? The note says she's in the hospital. We've got officers en route to the address we found in county records," Jenkins confirmed as her partner led the still-threatening Richard toward the police cruiser outside. "We'll need statements from everyone here, especially you, Dr. Reynolds." Marcus nodded, touching his jaw gingerly, already feeling the swelling where Richard's, no Garrett's, fist had connected. "Whatever you need. I just want to make sure Sophie is safe." "You did that," Officer Jenkins assured him. "Most people wouldn't have noticed the signs or would have convinced themselves it wasn't their business to interfere. That little girl is lucky you were paying attention." Lucky wasn't the word Marcus would have chosen. As he watched through the window while Richard Garrett was placed in the back of the police cruiser, he thought about the chain of circumstances and choices that had led to this moment. His own childhood experiences that had made him vigilant, Sophie's bravery in reaching out for help, the office protocols they'd established for exactly this type of situation. Not luck, but preparation meeting opportunity. The thought brought little comfort as he considered what Sophie and her mother must have endured, and the long road of healing that lay ahead for them both. In the quiet consultation room, Sophie sat with Ms. Patel, her small hands wrapped around a cup of hot chocolate that Lisa had prepared. The girl's eyes were red-rimmed from crying, but there was something new in her expression now. A fragile, tentative hope replacing the careful blankness she had maintained during her previous visit. "Dr. Reynolds," she said softly when she saw him in the doorway. "Is he really gone?" Marcus nodded, entering the room slowly and taking a seat across from her. "Yes, Sophie. He's with the police now. He can't hurt you anymore." Sophie's lower lip trembled. "What about my mom? Is she okay? He hurt her really bad this time." "The police are going to find her right now," Marcus assured her, though his heart clenched at the implication of this time. How many times had this child witnessed violence against her mother? "The best doctors will take care of her." "And my real dad?" Sophie asked, her voice barely above a whisper. "In Boston? Can I see him?" "The police are contacting him as we speak," Ms. Patel interjected gently. "He's been looking for you, Sophie. He never stopped looking." A small sob escaped Sophie then, the first unreserved emotional expression Marcus had seen from her. "I thought Richard said he didn't want us anymore, that he'd forgotten about me." "That wasn't true," Marcus said firmly. "None of what Richard told you was true. Your dad has been searching for you and your mom this whole time." Sophie wrapped her arms around herself, seeming both younger and older than her 9 years. A child who had endured adult terrors but still needed the fundamental security of parental love. "I was so scared," she admitted, looking up at Marcus with eyes that had seen too much. "But you said this was a safe place. And I remembered what you said about telling you if something was bothering me." The simple trust in her words struck Marcus profoundly. In that moment, he understood more clearly than ever the responsibility that came with his profession. Not just to care for children's teeth, but to be attentive to the whole child, to create truly safe spaces where the vulnerable could find protection. "You were very brave, Sophie," he told her sincerely. "Braver than most grown-ups would be in your situation." A ghost of a smile touched Sophie's lips. "Like the dolphins," she said softly. "They help each other when they're in trouble." Marcus nodded, remembering her words from the previous appointment. Words that had seemed odd at the time but now revealed their poignant significance. Yes, exactly like the dolphins. Outside the consultation room, the aftermath of the confrontation continued to unfold. Additional officers had arrived to take statements from staff and the few patients who had been in the waiting room during the incident. Helen was explaining their office protocols for suspected abuse cases, while Lisa provided a detailed account of her observations during both of Sophie's appointments. Through the plate glass windows of the practice, Marcus could see curious onlookers gathering on the sidewalk, drawn by the presence of multiple police vehicles. Oak Ridge was a small town where such incidents were rare, and by evening, news of what had happened at Reynolds Pediatric Dentistry would likely be spreading through local social circles and online community groups. But for now, in this quiet room with Sophie, none of that mattered. What mattered was that a child who had been living in fear had found the courage to reach out, and adults who were paying attention had responded. It wasn't a happy ending yet. There would be difficult days ahead for Sophie and her mother, investigations and legal proceedings, therapy and healing, but it was the crucial first step towards safety and recovery. Officer Jenkins appeared in the doorway, her expression somber but satisfied. "We've located Ellen Miller," she reported. "She's being transported to Oak Ridge Memorial Hospital. She's conscious and stable, though she sustained multiple injuries consistent with physical assault." Can I see her? Sophie asked immediately, sitting up straighter. Soon, Jenkins promised. The doctors need to take care of her first, and we need to ask her some questions. But I have someone on the phone who very much wants to speak with you. She held out her cell phone to Sophie. Your father, David Miller. Sophie stared at the phone as if it might disappear, her small hand shaking as she reached for it. Daddy? She whispered into the device, her voice breaking. It's Sophie. Marcus and Ms. Patel exchanged glances, silently agreeing to give the girl privacy for this moment. They stepped out into the hallway, closing the door partially but keeping Sophie in sight. You should get that jaw looked at, Ms. Patel observed, noting the bruising that was becoming more visible on Marcus's face. He got you pretty good. Marcus touched the tender area gingerly. Later. Right now, I want to make sure Sophie's taken care of. What happens next for her? We'll need to coordinate with Massachusetts authorities and social services, Ms. Patel explained. Based on the preliminary information, it appears her biological father has legal custody rights that were violated when the mother's new husband essentially kidnapped them both. If her mother requires extended hospitalization, Sophie might be placed temporarily with a foster family until her father can get here from Boston, unless we can locate suitable family members locally. The thought of Sophie being placed with strangers after all she'd been through troubled Marcus deeply. Is there any way to expedite the process? After what she's experienced, another major disruption seems unnecessarily traumatic. Ms. Patel nodded in understanding. I'll do what I can. These situations are complicated, but given the circumstances, we might be able to arrange emergency placement with her father once we've verified everything. Through the partially open door, they could hear Sophie's side of the conversation, short, emotional responses punctuated by tears, but with an undercurrent of relief and growing animation that transformed her entire demeanor. The connection to her real father seemed to be reawakening something in the girl that had been suppressed during her time with Richard Garrett. I missed you too, Daddy, she was saying, her voice stronger now. Every day. No. I kept your picture hidden in my special box. Yes, I remembered the phone number. But he took all the phones away. Can I really come home? The naked hope in that last question pierced Marcus's heart. Home. Not the house in Oak Ridge where she'd been held virtually captive, but the place where she was truly loved and safe. Officer Jenkins approached from the reception area, beckoning Marcus and Ms. Patel. We've confirmed with Boston PD, she said quietly. David Miller filed a missing persons report 3 months ago when his ex-wife and daughter failed to return after a weekend custody visit. The new husband, Richard Garrett, has a history of domestic violence charges that were dropped by previous partners. They've been tracking them through 3 different states as Garrett kept moving them around. How did he manage to enroll Sophie as a new patient here with false information? Marcus asked, recalling the intake forms Richard had completed. Forged documents, most likely, Jenkins replied. We found multiple sets of identification in his wallet under different names. He's been using the Bennett alias here in Oak Ridge, complete with falsified insurance information. It's a sophisticated operation, not his first time doing this. The implications were chilling. A calculated predator who had planned every detail, systematically isolating his victims and creating a facade of normalcy to the outside world. It explained the lack of online presence Marcus had discovered, the inconsistencies in Richard's stories, and his insistence on controlling all interactions with Sophie. Inside the consultation room, Sophie was finishing her conversation. Her face tear-streaked but animated in a way Marcus hadn't seen before. I love you too, she said into the phone. Please come soon. She handed the device back to Officer Jenkins when she entered, looking up with reddened but hopeful eyes. My dad's coming tonight. He's getting on a plane right away. That's wonderful news, Jenkins said warmly. In the meantime, we're going to take you to see your mom at the hospital. Okay? Sophie nodded eagerly. Is she really okay? Richard said. She trailed off, her expression clouding at the memory. She's being well cared for, Jenkins assured her. And she'll be very happy to see you. As they prepared to transport Sophie to the hospital, Marcus knelt before her, wincing slightly at the pain in his jaw. "Sophie, I'm so proud of you," he said sincerely. "What you did today took incredible courage." Sophie looked down, suddenly shy at the praise. "I was scared," she admitted. "But I remembered what you said about this being a safe place. And I thought about my real dad every day." "Being brave doesn't mean you're not scared," Marcus told her gently. "It means you do what's right even when you are scared. That's what you did today." A small, tentative smile curved Sophie's lips, the first genuine smile Marcus had seen from her. "Thank you for helping me," she whispered. "He said nobody would believe me if I told." The simple statement revealed volumes about the psychological manipulation Richard had employed, the isolation, the undermining of trust, the systematic destruction of a child's faith in the outside world's willingness to help. "I believed you," Marcus assured her. "And now everyone else does too." As Officer Jenkins prepared to escort Sophie to the hospital, the girl suddenly reached out and hugged Marcus briefly but fiercely. "Like the dolphins," she murmured against his shoulder before pulling away, a secret understanding passing between them. Marcus watched as Sophie left with the officers and Ms. Patel, her small figure walking with subtle but noticeable difference. Shoulders a bit straighter, steps a bit more certain. The long journey of healing was just beginning, but she had taken the crucial first step out of darkness. In the aftermath, as the office slowly returned to a semblance of normalcy, Marcus found himself sitting alone in his private office, the events of the day washing over him in waves of emotion. Relief, anger, sorrow, and a profound sense of both professional and personal validation. Helen knocked gently before entering, carrying an ice pack. "For your jaw," she said, handing it to him. "The emergency replacement dentist will be here in 20 minutes to handle the afternoon appointments. I've told him he's covering for you because you were injured stopping a child abduction." Her matter-of-fact tone belied the pride in her eyes, which happens to be the absolute truth. Marcus placed the ice pack against his throbbing jaw with a grimace that turned into a pained smile. "Thanks, Helen, and thank you for following the protocol perfectly. Everything worked exactly as we'd planned, though I never really expected to need it." Helen's expression sobered. "What that poor child and her mother have been through, it doesn't bear thinking about. But you saw what others might have missed, Marcus. Your own history made you vigilant in a way many wouldn't be." The observation struck a deep chord. Marcus's gaze drifted to the drawer where he kept the photograph of himself and his mother. What had seemed like the worst experience of his life, the years of abuse, the haunting memories, had ultimately equipped him to recognize the signs in Sophie that others might have dismissed. "Sometimes our deepest wounds become our greatest strengths," he said softly, more to himself than to Helen. As the afternoon progressed, Marcus gave his formal statement to the police, received medical attention for his jaw, thankfully just badly bruised, not broken, and finally returned home in the early evening, physically and emotionally exhausted but unable to quiet his racing mind. Reports from Officer Jenkins confirmed that Ellen Miller was being treated for multiple injuries, including 3 broken ribs and a concussion, but was expected to recover fully. David Miller had boarded an emergency flight from Boston and would arrive by midnight. The initial investigation had uncovered disturbing evidence in the house Richard had rented in Oak Ridge: a complex security system, phones and computers locked away, mail intercepted, and a basement room that appeared to have been used as punishment. In his quiet house, Marcus found himself standing before the bathroom mirror, examining the dark bruise spreading across his jaw. The face that looked back at him seemed somehow different, changed not by the physical mark but by the day's events, by the realization that the professional boundaries he maintained had been tested and crossed, and that in doing so, he had fulfilled the deepest purpose of his calling. His phone chimed with a text message from Officer Jenkins. "David Miller has landed. Reunion with Sophie at hospital happening now. Thought you'd want to know." Marcus smiled despite the pain it caused, imagining the scene. A father embracing the daughter he had feared lost forever. A child finding safety in the arms of her true protector. It wasn't an ending, merely the beginning of a different story, one of healing and rebuilding, but it was infinitely better than the alternative. As he prepared for bed, Marcus's thoughts returned to Sophie's words. "Like the dolphins." They help each other when they're in trouble. In the vast ocean of human suffering, perhaps that was all any of them could do. Reach out when someone was drowning, offer a lifeline, guide them toward safety. Today, he had been Sophie's dolphin. Tomorrow, perhaps he would recognize another child in need. That night, for the first time in many years, Marcus dreamed of his mother. Not as he had last seen her, wasted by disease in a hospital bed, but as she had been during those brief, precious years of freedom after they escaped his father. In the dream, she smiled at him with pride and whispered, "You see them now, Marcus. You see the ones like us." He woke with tears on his face but a profound sense of peace in his heart. The past could not be changed, but its lessons could transform the future. One careful observation, one courageous intervention, one saved life at a time. 6 weeks had passed since the day Sophie Bennett, now reclaiming her true identity as Sophie Miller, had slipped Marcus that desperate note. Autumn had fully settled over Oak Ridge, the maples along Main Street blazing with red and gold, shopkeepers displaying pumpkins and cornstalks in anticipation of Halloween. Life in the small Connecticut town had largely returned to its peaceful rhythms, the dramatic events at Reynolds' Pediatric Dentistry fading from local gossip into community lore. For Marcus, however, the case remained ever-present, coloring his days and haunting his nights. The bruise on his jaw had faded, but the impact of those events had permanently altered something within him, reawakening dormant memories while simultaneously giving them new context and purpose. He sat in the witness preparation room at the Oak Ridge County Courthouse, straightening his bow tie, today's pattern featured jack-o'-lanterns, a seasonal touch he hoped might bring a smile to Sophie's face if she saw him. The preliminary hearing for Richard Garrett was scheduled to begin in an hour, and the prosecutor, Amara Okafor, had requested this final briefing with key witnesses. "Dr. Reynolds," Ms. Okafor began, her sharp eyes studying him over rimless glasses. "I want to review the sequence of events one more time. The defense will likely try to characterize your actions as an overreaction, possibly even suggest you manipulated a child into making false accusations." Marcus nodded, familiar with this strategy from their previous discussions. "I understand, but my documentation is thorough, from the initial appointment through the final confrontation. Everything was done according to established protocols for suspected abuse cases, which you developed yourself," Ms. Okafor noted, "based on your personal experiences as well as professional training." For a moment, Marcus tensed. His childhood history wasn't something he discussed openly, but during preparation for the case, he had shared the relevant details with the prosecutor, knowing the defense might try to use it against him. "Yes," he acknowledged, "my personal history informed my professional vigilance, but everything I observed with Sophie was documented objectively. The physical evidence subsequently discovered in the Garrett home corroborates those observations." Ms. Okafor nodded, satisfied. The defense attorney, James Mercer, is known for aggressive cross-examination. He'll likely challenge the appropriateness of your questioning Sophie without parental consent, your decision to photograph the note without immediate disclosure to Garrett, and the timing of your call to authorities. "All actions taken were within my duties as a mandated reporter," Marcus replied calmly. "When a child discloses abuse, my legal and ethical obligation is to the child's safety, not to the parent's supposed rights, especially when that parent is the alleged abuser." A knock at the door interrupted their discussion. Officer Jenkins entered, looking professional in her formal uniform rather than the casual patrol attire Marcus was accustomed to seeing her in. "Ms. Okafor, Dr. Reynolds," she greeted them. "I wanted to let you know that Ellen Miller has arrived with Sophie and David. They're in a separate waiting area." Marcus's pulse quickened. "How are they doing?" Jenkins's expression softened slightly. "Ellen's still moving carefully. Those rib fractures take time, but physically she's healing well. Emotionally," she paused. "It's a process. Sophie seems to be doing better than her mother, honestly. Kids can be remarkably resilient when they're in a safe environment." "Will Sophie be testifying today?" Marcus asked, concern evident in his voice. "No," Ms. Okafor interjected firmly. "This is just the preliminary hearing to establish probable cause. We've worked out an arrangement where Sophie's written statement will be entered into evidence. along with the recorded forensic interview conducted by the Child Advocacy Center. If we proceed to trial, which seems likely given Garrett's not guilty plea, we'll reassess then. Relief washed over Marcus. The thought of Sophie having to face her abuser in court had troubled him deeply. Ellen will be testifying today, Officer Jenkins added. She's nervous but determined. David has been a solid support for both of them. The door opened again, and Helen poked her head in. Having witnessed the critical events at the dental office, she too had been called to testify. They're starting to seat people, she informed them. The courtroom's filling up fast. Marcus wasn't surprised. The case had generated significant local interest, not just for its dramatic elements but because it had exposed how easily a predator like Richard Garrett could insert himself into a community, creating a facade of normalcy while committing horrific abuse behind closed doors. It had shaken Oak Ridge's sense of security, prompting uncomfortable questions about how many signs might be missed in other homes, other families. As they made their way toward the courtroom, Marcus caught a glimpse of David Miller standing protectively beside a woman he recognized as Ellen from photographs. Petite, with the same hazel eyes as Sophie, though now shadowed by experiences Marcus could only imagine. She looked up, catching his gaze, and offered a small nod of recognition. Before he could approach them, Ms. Okafor guided him through the courtroom doors. "Remember," she murmured, "just the facts as you observed them. Your professional observations carry significant weight." The courtroom was indeed nearly full, with local residents, media representatives, and what appeared to be domestic violence advocates filling the gallery. Marcus took his seat in the witness waiting area, his gaze inevitably drawn to the defense table where Richard Garrett sat beside his attorney. Garrett looked markedly different from the controlling yet charming man who had brought Sophie to the dental office. His well-groomed appearance had given way to the institutional neatness of pretrial detention, prison-issued clothing, hair cut to regulation length. Yet he maintained a posture of indignation, occasionally leaning to whisper something to his attorney with animated gestures. The bailiff called the court to order, and Judge Eleanor Harmon entered, her stern expression surveying the packed room before she took her seat. With practiced efficiency, she established the parameters for the hearing, reminding all present that its purpose was to determine whether sufficient evidence existed to proceed to trial, not to establish guilt or innocence. As the proceedings began, Marcus found himself hyper-aware of every detail: the methodical presentation of evidence by Ms. Okafor, the calculated objections from the defense, the judge's measured responses. But his attention remained primarily fixed on Ellen Miller as she was called to testify. Ellen approached the witness stand slowly, the physical aftermath of her injuries still evident in her careful movements. After being sworn in, she sat with hands clasped tightly in her lap, her gaze deliberately avoiding Richard Garrett. "Mrs. Miller," Ms. Okafor began gently, "could you please tell the court about your relationship with the defendant, Richard Garrett?" Ellen's voice was quiet but steady as she recounted meeting Garrett 3 years earlier at a professional conference in Boston, where she worked as an event coordinator. Their relationship had progressed quickly. Too quickly, she now recognized, with Garrett presenting himself as charming, successful, and especially attentive to her daughter Sophie from a previous marriage. "When did you first notice concerning behavior?" Ms. Okafor prompted. Ellen swallowed hard. "After we were married. It started small comments about my friends, suggestions that they didn't respect our relationship. He'd check my phone, just teasing at first, then more seriously. He encouraged me to work from home, saying we could afford it with his consulting income. Looking back, I can see he was isolating me, but at the time, each step seemed reasonable, even caring." As Ellen continued, describing Garrett's escalating control over her finances, relationships, and daily movements, Marcus recognized the classic progression of coercive control, the gradual tightening of restrictions until the victim is effectively trapped. The courtroom remained utterly silent, the collective tension palpable as Ellen detailed the first physical assault, which occurred when she questioned a significant withdrawal from their joint account. "The worst part wasn't the physical pain," Ellen said, her voice wavering slightly. "It was how he involved Sophie, making her watch, telling her this was what happened when people didn't follow the rules, using her love for me as a weapon." From his position, Marcus could see several jurors shifting uncomfortably, their expressions reflecting the disturbing nature of Ellen's testimony. Even Judge Harmon's normally impassive face showed subtle signs of distress. "Mrs. Miller," Ms. Okafor continued, "please explain the events that led to your relocation to Oak Ridge, Connecticut." Ellen described how Garrett's abuse had escalated after a teacher at Sophie's school noticed bruising and filed a report. He was furious. That night, he told us we were moving, that people were conspiring against our family, that we needed a fresh start. Within a week, he'd rented a house in Oak Ridge under the name Bennett, enrolled Sophie in homeschooling programs, and cut off all our communication with family and friends. "Did you attempt to seek help during this time?" Ellen nodded, tears now flowing freely. "Once, I found an old phone he'd forgotten about in a drawer. I tried to call my parents, but he caught me. That's when—" She paused, taking a shuddering breath. "That's when he put me in the hospital. He told the emergency room staff I'd fallen down the stairs, and I was too terrified to contradict him with Sophie sitting right there." Throughout Ellen's testimony, Marcus observed Richard Garrett's reactions. The man maintained a facade of calm disbelief, occasionally shaking his head slightly or leaning to whisper to his attorney. But Marcus noticed the tightening of his jaw, the controlled breathing, signs of barely contained rage beneath the performance of wrongful accusation. When Ms. Okafor finished her direct examination, defense attorney James Mercer approached the stand. Tall and impeccably dressed, Mercer projected confident authority as he addressed Ellen. "Mrs. Miller," he began smoothly, "I understand this is difficult, but I need to clarify some points. You've described a relationship that became controlling and abusive, yet you remained with Mr. Garrett for nearly 3 years. Is that correct?" Ellen's posture stiffened. "Yes. And during that time, did you ever file a police report? Seek a restraining order? Tell family members about the alleged abuse?" "No," Ellen admitted, her voice smaller. "I was afraid. He threatened to take Sophie away, said he'd convince everyone I was an unfit mother. And I believed him." Mercer nodded sympathetically, though the gesture seemed calculated to Marcus. "I see. And isn't it true that you voluntarily moved to Oak Ridge with Mr. Garrett? That you signed the rental agreement alongside him?" "I signed what he told me to sign," Ellen replied, a flash of anger breaking through her vulnerable demeanor. "When someone has demonstrated they'll hurt you and your child if you don't comply, voluntary loses its meaning." A murmur of approval rippled through the courtroom, quickly silenced by Judge Harmon's sharp glance. Mercer shifted tactics. "Mrs. Miller, you've claimed Mr. Garrett isolated you. Yet records show you maintained employment, visited doctors, and went shopping regularly in Oak Ridge. If you were truly being held against your will, why not seek help during any of these public outings?" Ellen's hands trembled visibly. "He always had Sophie," she said, her voice breaking. "If I wasn't home, she was with him. The threat was always implicit: cooperate or Sophie suffers. And he monitored everything, tracked my phone, timed my errands, checked receipts. The few times I tried to signal something was wrong, people either didn't notice or didn't want to get involved." The cross-examination continued for nearly an hour, Mercer methodically attempting to undermine Ellen's credibility by highlighting inconsistencies and suggesting alternative explanations for her injuries. Throughout, Ellen maintained her testimony, though the emotional toll was evident in her exhausted posture and tear-stained face. When Ellen was finally excused, Marcus watched David Miller meet her at the courtroom railing, offering silent support as they made their way back to their seats. The strain between them was visible. A marriage dissolved, now navigating complex co-parenting under traumatic circumstances. Yet their unified concern for Sophie created a bridge across those difficulties. Several other witnesses followed: the emergency room doctor who had treated Ellen's fall, officers who had responded to the dental office incident, and the forensic investigator who had documented evidence found in the Garrett home. Each testimony built upon the last, creating a comprehensive picture of systematic abuse and control. When Marcus was finally called to testify, he approached the stand with steady determination, consciously avoiding eye contact with Garrett. After being sworn in, he sat upright, hands resting calmly on his knees, projecting the professional confidence that had earned him the trust of thousands of young patients over his career. "Dr. Reynolds," Ms. Okafor began, "please describe your initial observations of Sophie Bennett, now identified as Sophie Miller, during her first appointment at your practice." Marcus spoke clearly, detailing the objective signs that had concerned him. Sophie's withdrawn behavior, her flinching when Richard touched her, the unexplained bruising, her deference to her supposed father, and the significant change in demeanor during Richard's brief absence. Based on your professional experience, what conclusions did you draw from these observations? Ms. Okafor asked. "I noted multiple indicators consistent with potential abuse or coercive control," Marcus answered carefully. "As a mandated reporter, I'm trained to recognize these signs. I documented my concerns and implemented our office protocol for monitoring potential abuse situations." "And what occurred during the second appointment that confirmed your suspicions?" Marcus described the moment Sophie had handed him the note, reading its contents aloud for the court record. As he recounted Sophie's desperate plea for help, he noticed several jurors glancing toward Richard Garrett with undisguised contempt. "Dr. Reynolds, what actions did you take upon receiving this note?" "I discreetly photographed it and activated our office's emergency protocol, which includes contacting authorities without alerting the suspected abuser," Marcus explained. "I then attempted to extend the appointment to keep Sophie in the safety of our office until help arrived." When Ms. Okafor concluded her questioning, James Mercer approached with the confident stride of someone preparing to dismantle testimony. "Dr. Reynolds," he began, "you've shared your observations and interpretations from 2 brief appointments. Isn't it possible you misinterpreted normal shyness as withdrawal, normal parental guidance as control?" "Possible but unlikely," Marcus replied evenly. "The constellation of signs I observed, taken together, created a concerning pattern that warranted further investigation." Mercer nodded, pacing slightly. "I understand you have a particular sensitivity to potential abuse cases due to your own childhood experiences. Isn't it possible this personal history colored your perception of the Bennett family dynamic?" Marcus had anticipated this line of questioning. "My personal history informs my professional vigilance, but my assessment was based on objective observations documented according to established protocols. Furthermore, the note Sophie gave me provided direct disclosure of abuse, which mandated immediate action regardless of any prior suspicions." "Regarding this note," Mercer continued, "you chose to conceal it from Mr. Garrett, Sophie's apparent father and legal guardian at the time. Don't you think he deserved to know about such a serious accusation?" "No," Marcus stated firmly, causing several heads in the jury box to turn in surprise at his directness. "When a child discloses abuse, my ethical and legal obligation is to protect that child, not to alert the alleged abuser, which could place the child at greater risk." "And you determined solely on your authority that Mr. Garrett was an alleged abuser based on a note from a 9-year-old child?" Mercer challenged. Marcus leaned forward slightly. "I determined based on my professional training that Sophie's disclosure warranted immediate protective action. The subsequent investigation, including the discovery of falsified identities, Sophie's positive identification of her biological father, and the documented injuries to Ellen Miller, validated that assessment." Throughout the cross-examination, Marcus maintained his composure, refusing to be provoked by Mercer's increasingly aggressive questioning. When asked about his physical intervention during Garrett's attempt to flee with Sophie, Marcus acknowledged acting instinctively to protect a child he believed was in danger. "So you assaulted my client based on your instinct?" Mercer pressed. "I intervened to prevent your client from removing a child who had disclosed abuse from a safe environment," Marcus corrected calmly. "The subsequent violence was initiated by Mr. Garrett, not me." When Marcus was finally excused from the stand, he felt drained but satisfied that he had presented the facts accurately and withstood the defense's attempts to undermine his credibility. As he returned to his seat, he caught Ellen Miller's gaze. She mouthed a silent thank you that affected him more deeply than any verbal expression of gratitude could have. The preliminary hearing continued through the afternoon, with final witnesses including Helen and Officer Jenkins describing the chaotic scene when Garrett had attempted to flee with Sophie. By late afternoon, Judge Harmon had heard sufficient evidence to bind the case over for trial, denying the defense's request for bail modification due to the severity of the charges and risk of flight. As the courtroom began to empty, Marcus found himself approached by David Miller, a tall, earnest man whose resemblance to Sophie was striking once you knew to look for it. "Dr. Reynolds," he said, extending his hand, "I've been wanting to meet you properly. What you did for my daughter." His voice caught, emotion momentarily overwhelming him. "There aren't words adequate to thank you." Marcus shook his hand firmly. "How is Sophie doing?" David's expression softened. "Better than anyone could have expected, though she still has nightmares. The therapist says she's showing remarkable resilience. She asks about you sometimes. Wants to know if your jaw is okay." He smiled slightly at this, the concern so characteristic of his daughter. "Would it be possible to see her briefly?" Marcus asked. "I understand if it's not appropriate right now." "Actually, I think she'd like that," David replied. "She's with my parents in the private waiting area. We didn't want her in the courtroom at all." Following David through the courthouse hallways, Marcus felt a curious mixture of professional satisfaction and personal investment. In most cases, once a child was safe, his role ended, the natural boundaries between healthcare provider and patient maintaining appropriate distance. But Sophie's case had crossed those boundaries in ways that couldn't be neatly recompartmentalized. The private waiting room was a small, comfortably furnished space designed for witnesses needing separation from the general courthouse population. Inside, an elderly couple, presumably Sophie's grandparents, sat on either side of Sophie, who was reading a book with such absorption that she didn't immediately notice their entrance. "Sophie," David said gently, "look who's here to see you." Sophie glanced up, and the transformation in her face was immediate and profound. Gone was the careful blankness that had characterized her expression during those dental appointments. Instead, her eyes widened with genuine pleasure, and she jumped up from her seat. "Dr. Reynolds," she exclaimed, approaching him with a confidence that contrasted sharply with her previous fearful demeanor. "Your jaw isn't bruised anymore." Marcus smiled, unconsciously touching the spot where Richard's fist had connected weeks earlier. "All healed," he confirmed. "How are you doing, Sophie?" She considered the question with surprising thoughtfulness for a 9-year-old. "I'm okay most days," she replied honestly. "I'm going to a real school now, and I have a friend named Lily who sits next to me. But sometimes I still get scared, especially at night." Her candor touched Marcus deeply. "That's completely normal after what you've been through," he assured her. "The scary feelings usually get smaller over time." Sophie nodded solemnly. "That's what my therapist says too. She's nice, but not as nice as you." She hesitated, then added, "I brought something to show you." From her backpack, Sophie withdrew a slightly wrinkled drawing on construction paper. She handed it to Marcus with a shy smile. The artwork depicted a dental office with a smiling dentist, complete with bow tie, and a little girl. Above them, rendered in blue crayon, swam several dolphins. "It's us," Sophie explained unnecessarily. "And the dolphins because they help each other." She paused, looking at him with those wise hazel eyes. "My teacher asked us to draw a hero, and I drew you." Marcus felt his throat tighten with emotion he couldn't entirely suppress. "This is beautiful, Sophie." "Thank you." David placed a gentle hand on his daughter's shoulder. "Sophie's going to be testifying at a presentation for the American Dental Association next month about recognizing signs of abuse in pediatric patients. Would you consider joining the panel?" The request surprised Marcus. "I'd be honored," he replied sincerely. "But are you sure Sophie is ready for something like that?" "It was her idea," Ellen said, entering the room quietly. She moved carefully, still healing from her injuries, but her eyes held a strength that hadn't been present in the courtroom. "She wants to help other kids who might be trapped like she was. The child psychologist thinks it could be empowering for her, as long as it's carefully managed." Sophie nodded eagerly. "I want to tell dentists to really look at kids, not just their teeth, and to believe them if they try to ask for help." The wisdom in her simple statement struck Marcus profoundly. How many children sat in dental chairs across the country, harboring secrets they couldn't articulate, showing signs that went unnoticed? How many professionals missed those signs, either through lack of training or reluctance to involve themselves in difficult situations? "I think that's an excellent idea," Marcus told Sophie. "Together, we might help a lot of other children." As they said their goodbyes, with promises to meet again before the ADA presentation, Marcus watched Sophie walk away hand in hand with her father, her posture that of a child gradually reclaiming the security that should be every child's birthright. Ellen followed a few steps behind, her own recovery clearly proceeding at a different pace, a reminder that healing rarely follows a linear path. Outside the courthouse, autumn sunlight gilded the changing leaves, and a crisp breeze carried the scent of wood smoke and apples. Marcus stood for a moment, breathing deeply, feeling the weight of the day's testimony gradually lifting. The case would proceed to trial, and he would likely be called to testify again. But the most critical outcome had already been achieved. Sophie was safe, reconnected with her true family, and beginning to heal. His phone buzzed with a message from Helen. "Staff meeting tomorrow about implementing the new training program? Everyone's on board." The message brought a smile to Marcus's face. In the weeks following Sophie's rescue, he had developed a comprehensive training program for dental professionals on recognizing and responding to signs of abuse. What had begun as an initiative within his own practice was now expanding, with interest from the State Dental Association and beyond. As Marcus walked to his car, his thoughts returned to the drawing Sophie had given him. The dolphins swimming above them, symbols of creatures who recognized distress in their own kind and responded with protection and support. In the vast ocean of human suffering, perhaps that was all any of them could do. Listen carefully, watch closely, and reach out when someone was drowning. For Sophie Miller, that had been enough to change the course of her life. For Marcus Reynolds, it had transformed a painful personal history into a powerful force for protection and change. And for countless children yet to sit in dental chairs across the country, it might mean the difference between continued suffering and the first step toward safety. The sun was setting as Marcus drove home through the autumn-painted streets of Oak Ridge, casting long shadows across the pavement. Tomorrow would bring new patients, new challenges, perhaps even new concerns to document and address. But today, at least one child was sleeping safely because someone had noticed, someone had listened, and someone had acted. And in the end, that made all the difference.